The morning sky was still half asleep when Timofey and his father reached the old bus stop at the edge of town. Frost clung to the metal bench, and thin clouds of breath escaped from the little boy's lips as he tried to keep up with his father's hurried steps. His weak legs trembled slightly from the cold, but he said nothing. He never complained. He had learned that complaints only made his father's face grow darker. "Sit here," his father muttered, placing the boy gently, yet with a strange stiffness, onto the bench. Timofey looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. His father didn't smile back. The boy hugged his small backpack, the one with faded cartoon rockets. Inside was everything he loved: 2 books, a broken toy car, and an apple his neighbor had given him that morning. He didn't know why his father had woken him so early. He didn't know why they had walked so far without speaking. But he believed, deep in his gentle little heart, that maybe today would be special. Maybe his father would take him somewhere fun. Maybe they would talk, just like other fathers and sons. But his father kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, glancing at the road as if waiting for something, or running from it. "Papa," Timofey finally whispered. His father flinched, then forced a thin smile. "I just need to go check something. I'll be right back." "Wait here." Timofey nodded. He trusted him. He had no other choice. His father turned away too quickly, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders tense beneath his worn coat. Timofey watched him walk down the empty road. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. The boy kicked his legs gently, trying to keep warm, humming a little tune he remembered from his mother, a lullaby she used to sing before she disappeared from his life as well. Cars passed now and then, each time blowing cold air onto the boy's face. He pressed his cheek against his backpack and whispered, "Papa will come back. He said he will." The words felt warm in his chest. But the wind grew colder. The sky grew brighter. And children with their parents began to pass on their way to school. One mother stopped briefly and asked, "Sweetheart, are you alone?" Timofey shook his head quickly. "No, my papa is coming back soon," he said proudly. She hesitated, then walked away. Minutes stretched into an hour. His small fingers became numb. Still, he waited. Every time he heard footsteps, his heart jumped, and he sat up straighter. But it was never his father. The truth began to sink into him slowly, like ice spreading across a lake. His eyes burned, but he refused to cry. If he cried, Papa might be sad when he returned. He whispered again, this time softer, almost to himself. "Papa, I'll wait. I'm here, I'm still here." And as the cold wind wrapped around his tiny body, Timofey kept his eyes fixed on the road where his father had disappeared, still believing in a promise that had already been broken. The sun had climbed higher, melting the frost on the old bus stop roof, but Timofey still shivered. He had pulled his thin jacket tight around his chest, clutching the edges as if they could shield him from the emptiness growing inside. Cars whooshed past, bright, clean, full of people who looked warm and safe behind the glass. Not one of them stopped. Then, late in the morning, a sleek black car approached, silent, powerful, unmistakably expensive. It slowed near the bus stop, its engine humming like a distant storm. Timofey blinked at its polished surface, he could almost see his reflection in it. The car didn't belong to this small, forgotten part of town. It looked like it had taken a wrong turn. The rear door opened with a soft click. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a charcoal coat that looked warmer than every blanket Timofey had ever owned. His shoes were perfectly shined, his scarf wrapped in a way that suggested someone else had tied it for him. His hair was silvering at the temples, and his expression carried the weight of a man who rarely smiled because life had taught him not to waste time on softness. This was Mikhail Orlov, the man newspapers called the Iron Millionaire. The kind of man who moved markets with a single phone call. The kind of man who rarely, if ever, noticed small children sitting alone at bus stops. But today, he noticed. At first, he only looked because the small figure on the bench didn't belong there. Something about the boy's stillness tugged at him. Children usually fidgeted, kicked their legs, played with their phones. But this boy was simply waiting with the patience of someone who had no choice. Mikhail hesitated. He wasn't a man who stopped for strangers. His life was controlled, scheduled, efficient. But something, perhaps the faint memory of another small boy he had once known, made him step closer. "Hey," he said, his voice deeper and softer than he expected. "Are you waiting for someone?" Timofey looked up. His eyes were large, tired, yet still hopeful. The boy nodded quickly, sitting straighter, as if trying to appear brave. "Yes, sir. My papa is coming back soon. He just went to check something." Mikhail's brows tightened. He glanced at the empty road stretching endlessly in both directions. How long have you been waiting? Timofey shrugged lightly. A little bit. He didn't want to sound like he was complaining. He told me to stay here. I promised I would. Promised. The word struck Mikhail in the chest like a physical blow. He studied the boy more closely, the way his legs trembled unevenly, the thin clothes, the backpack hugged to his chest like a shield. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. You're cold, Mikhail said quietly. Timofey forced a smile. I'm okay. Papa will be sad if he comes back and I left. There it was again, the pure, painful faith of a child. Mikhail felt a sting behind his ribs, the kind he rarely allowed himself to feel. It reminded him of someone he had failed long ago, someone he could never fix. Come, he said gently, surprising even himself. Let's get you warm. We'll wait for your father together. And for the first time that day, Timofey felt a tiny flicker of safety, delicate, like a candle flame, but real. The cafe Mikhail chose was a small, quiet place with warm yellow lights and the sweet smell of freshly baked pastries. When Mikhail guided Timofey inside, the boy's eyes widened in amazement. He had never been anywhere so cozy. The warmth wrapped around him instantly, melting the cold that had settled deep in his bones. Mikhail watched him carefully as they sat at a table near the window. The boy hesitated before sitting, as if unsure whether he was allowed to sink into the soft chair. His thin legs dangled awkwardly, trembling slightly, not from fear now, but from exhaustion. A waitress approached with a polite smile. What would you like, sweetheart? Timofey looked at Mikhail nervously, afraid to choose something too expensive. Anything you want, Mikhail said gently. Go ahead. The boy bit his lip, thinking. Maybe, a hot chocolate. He whispered, as if asking for the moon. And something to eat, Mikhail added, turning to the waitress. Something warm. As soon as she left, Timofey placed his backpack on his lap like a shield. Thank you, sir, he murmured. Papa and we don't really go to places like this. Mikhail nodded, his expression unreadable. He had seen children shy, children proud, children rude, but he had rarely seen a child so careful, so gentle, so afraid of being an inconvenience. So, Mikhail began softly, tell me about yourself. Timofey took a breath, as if preparing for an exam. I'm 8. I like stars and books with big pictures. I walk slowly because my legs, sometimes they don't listen to me. He smiled apologetically, as if the lack of strength in his limbs were his fault. And your father? Mikhail asked quietly. Timofey hesitated. His eyes flickered toward the window, toward the road outside. He's trying, he said finally. He works a lot. Sometimes he forgets things. But he's my papa. I'm sure he'll come. The confidence in his voice was so fragile, so heartbreakingly pure, that Mikhail felt something twist inside him. Because years ago, another little boy had sat in another room, waiting for another father who never came. His own son. The memory struck him like a cold wave, a small hand reaching for him while he walked away to take a business call, the tearful face he convinced himself he didn't have time to comfort, the argument that ended with his wife leaving, and taking the boy far away. He had buried that pain under fortunes, investments, skyscrapers. But this child, this abandoned boy with trembling legs, reopened a wound he had spent years sealing shut. The waitress returned with steaming hot chocolate and a bowl of soup. Timofey's eyes shone as he wrapped his hands around the warm cup. Do you have dreams, Timofey? Mikhail asked suddenly. The boy nodded eagerly. Yes, I want to walk fast someday. Maybe even run. And I want to learn to read big books. And maybe be useful. Useful, Mikhail repeated, almost choking on the word. Timofey nodded shyly. If I'm useful, Papa won't leave me. At that moment, something within Mikhail broke completely. He leaned forward, voice low, steady, filled with something he hadn't felt in years. Timofey, he said, you are already more valuable than you know. And for the first time since morning, the boy truly smiled. The following weeks passed like a gentle storm, quiet on the surface, but full of invisible shifts that would change Timofey's life forever. After that day at the cafe, Mikhail simply couldn't walk away. Something about the boy's trust, his small trembling legs, and his heartbreaking belief that he needed to be useful, to deserve love, it had carved itself into Mikhail's heart. He told himself he would help just a little, enough to ensure the child was safe. But, a little, turned into daily visits. And daily visits turned into something deeper. At first, Timofey was shy, unsure why this powerful man kept showing up. But soon he began smiling the moment he heard the familiar footsteps. Good morning, Mr. Orlov, he would say, waving from the clinic door. Mikhail always corrected him. Just Mikhail. A private medical team had assessed Timofey's condition within days. His legs were weak not because he was broken, but because he had never received proper treatment. Muscles needed strengthening, nerves needed training, his little body simply needed care. The kind of care no one had ever given him. Physical therapy began immediately. At first, it was painful. The boy whimpered during stretches, gripping the edges of the table, but he never complained. Not once. He stared at the floor, determined. "I want to be strong," he whispered. "Strong enough so Papa won't worry." Mikhail had to look away each time the boy said things like that, because the truth, that the father had abandoned him, was too cruel to reveal. Not yet. Not while Timofey still held on to hope like a lifeline. So instead, Mikhail made another decision. If the world had failed this child, he would not. Tutors were hired next. They discovered Timofey was bright in ways that surprised even the teachers. He learned quickly, asked thoughtful questions, and giggled every time he solved a problem. Mikhail began attending the lessons, pretending he was there, to observe, though everyone knew he simply enjoyed watching the boy thrive. Sometimes he brought pastries, sometimes books, sometimes toys, but always, he brought warmth. Little by little, the boy began to trust him. And one cold morning, after a difficult therapy session, something extraordinary happened. Timofey stood. Not with help, not with braces. He stood on his own. His legs trembled, his breath shook, but he stood tall, taller than he had ever stood in his life. His eyes filled with tears, and he looked toward the man who had made this moment possible. "Mikhail, look," he whispered proudly. Mikhail rose slowly, stunned. Pride filled him, a fierce, protective emotion he had not felt in years. He approached the boy carefully, as if the moment itself were fragile. "Timofey, you did this," he said, voice breaking. "You." Then the boy took a step, wobbly, uncertain, but real. He walked directly into Mikhail's arms. "Thank you," Timofey murmured against his coat. "Thank you for not leaving me." The words shattered whatever remained of Mikhail's emotional walls. Because he understood now, without any doubt. He hadn't saved this child. This child was saving him. Spring arrived slowly that year, brushing the city with soft warmth and cautious sunlight. Timofey was standing taller now, still wobbly, still unsure, but no longer the fragile boy who had once sat abandoned at a lonely bus stop. His cheeks had color. His eyes had life. And every day, he walked a little farther, stood a little longer, smiled a little brighter. Mikhail watched it all with a quiet awe he didn't know he was capable of feeling. Timofey had become a part of his routine, then a part of his heart, and eventually, without warning, a part of his purpose. The empty spaces in Mikhail's life, the rooms he never entered, the memories he had buried, they all began to shift, warmed by the simple presence of this brave little boy. But their fragile peace shattered one morning. Mikhail had arrived early at the rehabilitation center, carrying a book he knew Timofey would love. He expected to find the child practicing his steps with the therapist. Instead, he found chaos. Raised voices. A man shouting. And in the middle of it all, Timofey, his small hands trembling, eyes wide with fear. The man towering over him was unshaven, wild-eyed, his clothes wrinkled, his breath sharp with alcohol. The resemblance was unmistakable. His father. "I knew he'd end up with someone rich," the man snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Timofey. "Where's the money, boy? You've been living like a king while I suffer." Timofey backed away, instinctively searching for a safe presence. His eyes locked onto Mikhail the moment he entered. "Papa," the child whispered, not with hope this time, but with a broken sadness. Mikhail stepped forward immediately, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's far enough," he said, voice low and dangerous. The man scoffed. "Ah, look at this. The millionaire savior. You think you can take my kid? He's mine. Yours." Mikhail's eyes hardened. "You left him on a bus stop in the freezing cold. I was coming back. You didn't." Timofey's father lunged forward, but Mikhail moved quicker, shielding the boy. The staff rushed in, restraining the man as he shouted curses and accusations. The police were called. A report was filed. And for the first time, the truth was spoken aloud. Timofey had been deliberately abandoned. Through the whole ordeal, Timofey clung to Mikhail's coat. He didn't cry, but his small body shook with the tremors of old wounds reopening. Only when the officers finally led his father away did he whisper. "Was it my fault?" Mikhail knelt before him immediately, placing both hands gently on the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me," he said, voice steady and overflowing with warmth, "none of this was your fault. Not one single piece of it." Timofey blinked, confused. But he left because. No, Mikhail interrupted softly. He left because he couldn't see your worth. But I do. And I'm here. I'm not leaving. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The boy stared at him for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Mikhail's neck, small, trembling, desperate. Mikhail, can I stay with you? He whispered. Mikhail's eyes burned. The question was simple, but its meaning was everything. Yes, he said, voice breaking. Yes, Timofey, you can stay. From now on, you're home. And as they walked out of the center hand in hand, one tall and steady, the other small and brave, Timofey looked up at the man who had found him when no one else cared. You came back for me, he murmured. Mikhail smiled, a real smile, one that reached the softened corners of his eyes. This time, he whispered, I will never leave.